Hello, teachers. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar. My name is Janine Matts. I'm an English language specialist with RELO. Please introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from today. If you're in Latin America, if you're in other parts of the world, please introduce yourselves. Tell us where you're joining us from. Tell us what you teach, what grades you teach. Let's get to know each other a little bit in this space. Okay, welcome everyone to today's webinar, which is on a topic that is quite popular in the region, that is large class sizes and low resources. So today's title is Many Students and Few Resources equals Endless Possibilities. So let's get started. Good afternoon, those of you joining us. Hello, Gabby. Welcome. Okay. So we have a really important objective today, and our main objective in this webinar is to turn problems into opportunities, right? If we look at the situation of large class sizes and low resources in the region, this seems like a very big problem. But we as teachers have the chance to turn this problem into opportunities. And that's what we're going to look at today. Please, I encourage you guys to participate in the chat. Tell us about your realities. Tell us about the things you have done, some techniques you have used that have worked in large classrooms with low resources. We can all share information. Welcome from Pakistan. Nice to have you here. I can only imagine what time it is in Pakistan right now, but it's great that you're joining us. Thank you for coming. Okay, first I would like to know if you could comment in the chat, please. Do you teach in an urban or rural setting? And what is your average class size? So I live in Ecuador. And here in Ecuador, the public school system is very big, and the class sizes in many public schools are quite large. So I live in Ecuador's capital, which is Quito. And I have talked to public school teachers who in Quito have class sizes of between 40 and 50 students. So tell us about your reality. Tell us, are you living in a rural area, an urban area, and what is your average class size? Thank you for joining us from Yemen in the Middle East. That's amazing. Thank you for joining us. Hello, Yolanda. Nice to see you again. From Tarija, Bolivia. Hello from Loja, Ecuador. Luz Maria, thank you for joining us. Okay, so let's see. Let us know about your setting. So we have one response that says in a rural setting, 40 to 50 students per classroom. This is a challenge, right? Let's see what the rest say. What is your class size? What is your average class size? Okay, as we're sharing our own particular context, we can talk about a large class as a community. So as teachers, we need to kind of make a shift in our mindset, right? The biggest mindset shift we can make is to see our large class not as a problem, but as a powerful built-in community of learners. Okay, that's very important. Hello, the people who are just joining us now. Eliberto, nice to see you again. From Venezuela. Gabby teaches in an urban public pedagogical institute, 22 students. That's not too bad. That's great. Yolanda is in an urban area with 17 to 35 students. Thank you. Maita in an urban setting with an average of 30 students. Thank you, Maita from Bolivia. Okay, so our role is no longer to be the source of knowledge or the lecturer in our classrooms, but to become a facilitator or a coach. Our job is to create a structured environment where students can learn from and with each other. And this idea here goes hand in hand with scaffolding and many communicative approaches to language teaching that we should be working with today in the classroom. If you are familiar with scaffolding, please share with us in the chat your definition of what scaffolding is. What is scaffolding and why does this idea relate to scaffolding? Let's see. Okay, Liberto has 38 students. That's quite a big group. Thank you. Santi, welcome from Peru. Nice to see you also. So, scaffolding. What's the idea of scaffolding? What is your definition of scaffolding? And why does this idea of a facilitator go hand in hand with the idea of scaffolding? Okay, let's think about that. If we're familiar with scaffolding, we know that it's essentially a way to guide students in really what is their own acquisition or learning of the language, right? The idea now is that we not be an authoritative figure in the classroom, but rather a facilitator. Okay, so if we want to play that role, it goes well with communicative approaches because we use scaffolding in communicative approaches as well. We give students the tools to be able to do things in the classroom, but doing those things is their responsibility. Yeah, exactly. Eliberto mentions to us in the chat to build. Who's building? It's really the students who are building. If we think of the idea of a scaffold, what it is in general in architecture, for example, a scaffold is a temporary structure that helps us to construct a building. The scaffold is not the building. The scaffold is simply a way to more easily build the building. Yes, just like Christine mentions in the chat here, guide your students step by step. That's the idea. We're guides. We're facilitators. Okay. Yes. So how do we do this? We can do this in several different ways. Here are a couple of ideas. So we can activate peer-to-peer learning. In other words, when a student explains a concept to a classmate, they are not only helping that person to learn, but also solidifying their own understanding. It has been said in education that if we are able to explain a concept to another person, that means that we have a very good command of that concept. So if our students can do that explaining of something, then we can see that they actually have a good command of it. We can also empower student leaders. So for example, give students responsibilities that build their confidence and help manage the class. For example, group leaders, material managers, etc. If any of you have worked with these special roles with your students, let us know in the chat what those roles have been. Students often like to take on leadership roles, and it is good for their academic and eventually professional development. So if we can empower them by giving them these roles in our large classroom context, we are benefiting us as teachers because we have help, right? But we are also benefiting the students because we are helping them in their development. Yes. Okay, hello to those of you who are just joining us. Sonia, thank you for being here. Alfredo, also from Lima, thank you for joining us. Mayrita, thank you also for being here today. Okay, what else can we do to build this large class community? We can focus on processes and not necessarily a product. So we can focus on the process of communication. Did the students engage in the activity, and were they at least trying to use their English? A lot of times we teachers tend to focus on a final product. Did they do X, this? Did they turn it into me? And sometimes we forget to also focus on the process of creating that product. So the suggestion here is to focus on that process and not only on the final product. Okay. Hello, Andres from Guayaquil, Ecuador. Nice to see you. Okay. I have another question for you if you'd like to respond in the chat. What are some strategies you have tried that have worked with large classes? And in this particular context, by strategies, I mean what kinds of techniques for classroom management have you worked with your students in large classes, and have they been successful? Because a lot of times teaching is trial and error, right? So we try something, and if we realize it's not very effective, it doesn't work, we try something else. We try a different idea. Yeah. So we can share in the chat what types of ideas we have tried that have worked with large classes. Okay, Eliberto says debates and role plays. Good. If you'd like to share with us some of the topics of your debates, that would also be interesting. Thank you. Okay, some suggestions just for classroom management right now and routines. Strategic seating arrangements. So in an average classroom, we usually see seats arranged in rows of some sort, right? But if we can move beyond this traditional seating arrangement and we can put the desks, for example, in clusters of 4 to 6 desks together in a group like this, like little islands in your classroom, this could be beneficial. We can also put the desks, if we have the space, in a U shape. Yeah, this naturally encourages conversation and group work. We can also see the students are more responsive when we see them in a U because everyone is looking at each other. No one is looking at the back of the head of the student in front of them. No one is hiding behind the student. So if we can rearrange the desks, we can help to manage the class. Santi mentions to us in the chat having students work in groups, debates, discussions, etc. Great. Thank you, Santi. And this is a good idea. We will get to some more activities in a little bit. Okay, clear, consistent routines. Establish simple routines for everything, a specific signal to get everyone's attention. For example, if you can hear me, clap once. So your students just clap once. If you can hear me, clap once, and they clap once. If you don't want them to clap, you can tell them. If you can hear me, raise your hand or put up 2 fingers or whatever symbol you want. Yeah. This is a clear way to form groups, for example, or a signal for when you're going to do an activity or you need the class's attention. And then we have the power of signals. Try raising your hand to get everyone's attention, and students must raise their hands and stop talking once they see you. And if you have tried a technique like this in your classroom, you'll notice that it's contagious in a good way. So once someone realizes you're raising your hand as the teacher, the first person who notices it says, shh, and they raise their hand. And then the rest of the class usually follows and raises their hands as well. You see? So it's contagious, which is really good. Yes. Okay, we're looking at some more comments here. Gabby says working in groups. Yes, that's important. Thank you, Lourdes, for your comment. What an excellent topic. Alfredo also suggests working in groups. Yes. Yolanda says hand signals or visual clues to get their attention is great. You can turn off the lights. I remember I had a teacher who turned off the lights when she wanted our attention. So this is another technique, whichever one works for you. You can go to a specific part of the classroom in the very corner where you never stand, for example. It's what you are most comfortable with. Okay. Continuing with your input, please, I would like you to now tell me in the chat, what are some tools you have utilized in low resource contexts? So we've been talking about large class contexts, right? And oftentimes those large classes are accompanied by the situation of low resources. So tell us about some of the tools you have utilized in low resource contexts. I mean, if you are in a classroom with no projector, no internet, no computer, sometimes no speakers to play audios, what do you use instead? What are some things you use instead of those technological tools that have been effective tools in your classroom? Please share with us those tools that you use. Okay, Eliberto says we can assign some monitors to help you in the class, the best students, right? We have different terms for these. Sometimes we're called brigadiers, sometimes they're called teacher assistants. It depends, but a lot of, we can have students in different classes, yes, kind of help you with monitoring the class. And it's usually the best students, the most disciplined students, because we know we can count on them to follow through. Okay, tell us about some of the tools you have utilized in your context. Here I have some low-tech, high-impact tools that we can use. One, I'm sure that many of you have used because I've heard many teachers mention this, Realia. Realia is essentially any object that exists in our context in real life that we can use. Yes. So for example, a student's backpack can be used for prepositions. We can take a book and we can say the book is in or inside the backpack. We can use a pen to describe with adjectives. For example, this pen is old and blue. We can use clothes that students are wearing, etc., etc. Good. Yes, Gabby says real objects of the area, wallpapers, sticks, markers, anything we can touch, we can get our hands on is great to use in the classroom. Physical flashcards. Maritere says physical flashcards, guessing games, absolutely. Ricia agrees with Realia. Thank you. Andres says authentic materials or recycled materials to use in class. Absolutely. Recycled materials, plastic bottles, aluminum cans. We have to be creative. We can be creative. And we can use an artificial intelligence to help us to incorporate these items into our classroom. We can ask it to give us ideas of how to incorporate these items. Yes. Authentic content. And by authentic content, in this case, we mean local content. So in your context, in your cultural context, you can use local stories, songs, traditions, ask students to talk about their favorite local dish or a recent festival. Yeah, we can do these types of things in our particular context. This is good because these are events and things that students are already familiar with. The challenge is to work with these familiar things in English, to tell a story of their ancestors, but in English, or to use, for example, the melody of a song that is popular in your context and create new words for it in English, for example. Yeah, these are tools that we can use. Okay, let's see. Santi says posters, yes, cards, paper, bottle caps, all those things are totally fun to play with, and we can create different activities with them. Alfredo, you're going to find out about Realia and try more. Awesome, that's great. Eliberto says we can create or adapt linguistic games. Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Hi, Patty. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us from Monterrico. Hi, Jacqueline. Thank you for coming today. Okay, let's continue with some more high impact, low tech tools. So we have student notebooks. Yes, they all have notebooks. Okay, big deal. They write things in there. Yes, but we can use these notebooks and we can go a step beyond simply taking notes from the class. Like how? Well, we can encourage students to turn their notebooks into personal dictionaries, sketchbooks for new vocabulary, dialogue journals where they write to someone or to a partner and they can exchange these journals during the week. It doesn't have to simply be taking notes or doing dictations in your classroom. We can use those notebooks for a lot of other things. I have noticed in interacting with young people recently that a lot of young people like to draw. We can use their notebooks to let them use their creativity and draw certain things, and then they can talk about those drawings to us in English, using the English that they can use, keeping it at their level, obviously, but they can express that in English as well. And I also know during the pandemic, in the case of Ecuador at least, and I'm sure in many countries around the world, WhatsApp was a very important tool for communication. In the public school system, where students could not have classes online, their teachers 90% of the time communicated with them via WhatsApp. So we can use WhatsApp as another high impact tool. Most of our students who are at least maybe 12, 13 years old have their own cell phones, and most of them also have WhatsApp. So we can create a WhatsApp group for our class, or we can pair up students and have them exchange audios in English for speaking and listening practice with each other. And then they can talk about what types of interactions they have had in those WhatsApps. Yeah, so this is a really good tool that students are mostly comfortable with and can work with already that we can use in the classroom. Okay. Next question for you is, what fun games or activities have you used in your context? So we've talked about classroom management strategies. We've talked about some tools that we can work with. And now I'm curious to know, What kinds of fun games or activities have you used in your context? Thank you, those of you commenting in the chat. This is awesome. We have a great discussion going on. Yes, hello, those of you just joining us. Elva from Peru, Daniela from Bolivia, thank you for joining us. From Puerto Viejo, John, thank you for coming. Yeah, okay, so let's share. Daniela says she's worked with Hangman. That's a popular one. I think the students like that a lot too. Stressful, but they like it. Yeah. What other activities or games have you guys used in your contexts? Yolanda tells us hot seat. Good. We're going to look at hot seat. Yes. Choral drills. Okay. Board races, rotating groups, think, pair, share. These are all great activities. Thank you for sharing. Susan from Indonesia, thanks for joining us from the other end of the world. That's awesome. Thank you. Okay. Here's something that we could work with called the jigsaw method. Maybe some of you are already familiar with this method, but what happens in the jigsaw method? We divide a text or topic into 4 parts. If we have smaller groups or smaller class sizes, we can divide it into 3 parts or something. A, B, C, D. Yeah. So what we do is we form expert groups where all the members read and discuss the same part. So for example, all of my students who are in group A will read the first part of the text. Yeah. And group B will read the second part, and so on and so forth. Then we form jigsaw groups with 1 expert from each original group. And each expert teaches their part to the new group. So this forces every student to speak and to listen to everyone's participation so that they can put the story together. We're actually filling gaps in what the other students don't know, and we fill the gaps by what other students provide us, the information that they provide us. So yes, this is a good method to use if we'd like to work with reading and we want to divide a big class into smaller groups. Okay, some of you are commenting still. Yes, Gabby says board games she works with. Thank you. Jacqueline, tongue twisters. Ooh, those are challenging. Even for native speakers, tongue twisters are challenging, right? Yes. Okay, Simon says, Ristea says, as Simon says, that's another one. Yes. Board races. Eliberto says bingo. Elva says charades, story class. All of these are really great ideas. Thank you for sharing them. Okay, here's another activity that we can do when we have large class sizes and low resources, which is A-B partner activities. So what we do is we give half the students a worksheet or card labeled A, and the other half of the students a worksheet or card or whatever labeled B. So you can imagine what's going to happen here. Student A has information that student B needs, and vice versa. We can look at this also as information gap activities. These are very popular in communicative approaches to language teaching because we are exchanging real information, meaningful content. So they must ask each other questions to complete their own sheets. This gets all students talking simultaneously in pairs, yes, but they're all talking and interacting because they need information from their partner. So they're interacting in a meaningful way where they're processing meaning, they're producing meaning. And so when we have this type of interaction, we have language acquisition happening. When we're exchanging meaningful messages, there is language acquisition. So this is a good activity within a communicative framework of language teaching. Okay. Thank you, Patty, for joining us from Santo Domingo. I'm guessing that's in Ecuador. Thank you very much for being here today. Okay, some whole class games. Let's take a look. So we can do a game like stand up, sit down. This is very low maintenance. I know we as teachers are often overwhelmed. We are so busy all the time, preparing, grading, doing discipline, everything, teaching, that we need low maintenance games. And here's one of them, stand up, sit down. So we read a statement. If it's true for a student, they stand up. This is really great for practicing simple present tense, for example, or personal information, characteristics, personality traits, etc. You can also have students read their own statements. If you want each student to come up with a statement, that's also possible. So for example, I say, I like to swim. all of the students who agree with me stand up. Yeah, if you don't agree, you stay sitting. Yeah, you don't stand up. This is very simple. And again, we're transmitting meaning and we're processing meaning. So this is good for language acquisition. Four corners. This is similar, right? So we can designate the four corners of the room as strongly agree, agree, disagree, and strongly disagree. And we can read a statement and have students move to the corner that matches their opinion. This promotes movement and also sparks conversation. So if we're talking about topics that we can debate or things like that, like for example, I know there's a topic right now that's very controversial in my context in Ecuador, which is the gas subsidy. There is a gas subsidy from the government, and the government is starting to get rid of it. So we can say a statement like, the government should subsidize gas. Obviously, we can't do this activity with children who are 7, but if we have high school students, for example, we can have them stand in the part of the room that represents their opinion. And if they have the level of English to debate this, we can ask for some of the reasons. If they are capable of expressing those reasons, we can also generate a short conversation about the topic as well. Yeah, but moving students around, getting them to be physically active is also going to promote connecting with the material. Okay. Let's see. Next one is lineup conversations. So in this one, we divide the class into 2 lines facing each other. Yeah, so they're long lines that go down the class like this, and they're all looking at each other. Okay. So we can give a question or topic on the board, whatever grammar or vocabulary we might be working with, we can use that in these 2 lines, in this line of conversation. For example, we can say, what do you usually eat for breakfast? What do you usually eat for breakfast? And students talk with the person right in front of them in the line for 1 minute, 30 seconds, whatever is appropriate for your context, right? And then when you go to the next question, one of the 2 lines shifts. They move one person. The other line stays still. They don't move. Yeah. So that we rotate the people that we are talking to. Yeah. And so that everyone has a new partner. And we can repeat this with new questions. For these activities, I propose an elementary and high school version, because I know the contexts are different, the ages are different, their English level is often different. So for example, in elementary school, we can work with personal questions. What is your favorite color? What is your favorite food? What is your favorite animal, etc. And in high school, we can do something a little bit more that requires a little bit more profound thinking. So for example, that are opinion-based, like should students have cell phones in school? Should students wear uniforms in school, etc.? And they exchange their opinions, right? Okay, so that's an example of an activity that we can also do that's very easy to organize and to orchestrate. Okay. I saw this in the chat. Maritere mentioned found someone who. So I think this is similar, if not the same idea of Maritere. So we can use this activity of find a classmate, or we call it guess who, right? We can write a list of characteristics on the board, like for example, tall, short hair, glasses, wearing blue, etc. And the students secretly choose a classmate to be. And then others will ask yes, no questions to guess who it is. So for example, like in the elementary school, we can focus a lot on physical appearance. Is your person a boy, for example? We're thinking about someone in my mind. Let's say that I'm thinking about Justin Bieber, for example. Is your person a boy? Yeah. Does your person like music? We can add personality traits, likes and dislikes as we go higher in the grades. You know, does your person travel? Is your person a celebrity, etc.? Okay. We can also work with class surveys, in which students create a simple survey questions with teacher help. For example, what is your favorite subject, etc. They ask at least 5 to 10 classmates and record their answers. And then they will report their findings orally. So they will say something like, most students like math, many students shower at night and not in the morning, whatever the questions are. Yeah. In elementary school, we can work with favorite foods, colors, animals. In high school, we can work with music, hobbies, social media habits, things that are relevant to high schoolers' contexts. Yeah. Another benefit of doing an activity like class surveys is that you're kind of doing content and language integrated learning. You're doing something that's interdisciplinary in that we're working with a survey, but we're also working with simple statistics. If I, for example, ask 10 classmates, I can say, for example, 7 out of 10 classmates like math the best. That gives me 70%. It's simple math, right? We can combine math, in this case, simple statistics, with English. Yeah. So this is another benefit of doing class surveys, because the more we study language teaching, the more we realize that doing interdisciplinary work, learning English through other subjects, is beneficial. So this is a bonus for this particular activity, let's say. Okay. We can also do something called story cubes. So this is where the teacher writes random words on the board. For example, dog, mountain, phone, pizza, whatever words. These are words that students already are familiar with in English. In groups, students make a story using all the words, yeah? And then the groups can present their stories orally. In elementary school, we would use obviously concrete, simple words. And in high school, we can mix abstract words with those words because their vocabulary builds in high school. So we can use words that are more appropriate for their level and that can challenge them a little bit more. And it's fun for students to compare the stories, to see if they came up with the same context, the same plot, or similar plots. Sometimes the stories are vastly different. So this is a fun activity for students then to listen to their classmates. And you can even take it a step further and you could say whose story, for example, was the funniest, whose story was the scariest, whose story was the most interesting, etc. And then they can vote and discuss and things like that. Yeah. Okay. This is one that I think Yolanda may have mentioned in the chat, which is hot seat. I'm not sure, Yolanda, if you play it the same way that I'm going to describe it, but this is one way of doing hot seat. So we can have a student that sits with their back to the board. So let's imagine that the whole class is in front of me and the board is behind me. So I'm the student and I'm facing the class. I'm not looking at the board. And the teacher writes a word on the board. And the classmates need to describe that word without saying it, obviously. So if the word, for example, is folder, the students will say, oh, it's a place where you put papers. Backpack. No, it's made of plastic or paper or tagboard. Okay, folder. You see? Yeah. Exactly. So that's good. Yes. Martita, nice to see you from Ecuador. Thank you for being here. She says, this webinar reminds me of Paolo. Yes. One of our teachers in Ecuador. He challenged us to be creative, innovative, and resilient in our public system. Thanks to you for inspiring to do the best in our work. Thank you very much, Martita. Yes. Thank you. Yes. So this is another option using hot seat. This is very fun for students. And if you want to challenge them a little bit more, we can do something extra with this. We can give them a word, for example, like folder. Okay, you have to make the student guess the word folder, but you cannot use these 3 words to describe it. For example, paper, homework, tests. You cannot use that in your description. You have to think of other ways to describe it. I don't know if any of you have ever played a game called Taboo. It's a board game. It's not a board game, but it's a game where you have these cards, where you have to have people guess a word, but you cannot say a series of words to describe it, which makes it more challenging because how do you describe folder without saying paper, homework, and tests. You say, okay, it's a place where we put photocopies, for example, right? Something like that. Okay, so these are other ways to make the challenge a little bit even tougher for our students. All right. Here I've included some pictures, and I titled this slide, Homemade is full of H-E-A-R-T, so heart and art at the same time. These are pictures of my students. I teach at a university in Quito, Ecuador. My students are studying linguistics. That's their major. And I had them do readings of different articles, and I asked them to present the readings without technology. Because at my university, we do have computers and internet and screens. But I wanted to challenge them because many of our students go out and become English teachers, and they are faced with situations where they do not have technology. So I challenged them for this round of presentations. I said, present this in a didactic, dynamic, and fun way to your classmates without using technology. And that's what they did. So you can see in these pictures on the top left, we have, I don't know if you guys recognize these characters, but these are two very important names in language acquisition research, Stephen Krashen and Bill Van Patten. So my students decided to make a board game on a piece of poster board where the pieces were the experts in language acquisition, because the course was on language acquisition. So it was very creative, and they used die, and they rolled dice and had the pieces move and answered questions and things. The one on the right side is a version of Jeopardy. I don't know if any of you have worked with Jeopardy. Online, we have some templates to create Jeopardy games. Jeopardy is a game show that exists in the United States that is usually a trivia game show. It asks about different things like world geography and mathematics and all these things. Yeah. And you have different questions, and each question is worth different dollar amounts. So the questions at the bottom are the most difficult, and the ones at the top are the easiest. So my students made up a Jeopardy board where they had these questions pasted up there on the whiteboard. And so their classmates would choose one, and then they would have to answer the question on the card. And the last one, it looks very funny because one of my students had a balloon, like one of those contraptions that inflates balloons. So she asked a question to the volunteers, and they were timed to answer the question. They had a certain time limit, but the time limit was established by the balloon blowing up. So she kept blowing up the balloon until the balloon exploded. So the student had to answer the question before the balloon exploded. It was a lot of fun, The students really liked it a lot. It stressed them out, but it was a positive stressor because they were inspired to answer the questions quickly and accurately. So it was a good experience. It was a very good experience. So even in situations where we do have technology, sometimes it's good for students to go back to no technology because it forces them to conceptualize of things in a different way, to present them in a different way, to interact with the material in a different way. So these are just some examples from a real life classroom that we were able to do. Thank you. Those of you who are still commenting in the chat, Yolanda, thank you. You tell us how to play hot seat. Sometimes you have two students from different groups to guess. Whoever guesses the word first wins. Exactly. We can make it a competition between groups. That's also a great technique. You like Jeopardy. That's good. Yes, Jeopardy is fun for students. We do have to remember, however, that when we do these activities, we still want to be sure that we're teaching and interacting with students communicatively. So that means we have to know that they're processing meaning, right? That they're understanding meaning. Jeopardy can be a good activity, for example, with culture. We can put all the cultures points that we've covered in the Jeopardy game and have the students go through the questions like that. Yeah, but we don't want to do things that are mechanical. So for example, in a Jeopardy game, we should not say, what is the third person singular present perfect continuous of the verb to write? No, we're not doing that because students are not communicating anything. They're not processing meaning. They're not understanding meaning. So we don't construct it like that, but we construct it in a way where we know that students are processing and producing meaning. Okay? Okay. I want to touch on assessment very briefly because as you know, as we all know, grading is very time consuming. And when we have a lot of students, like 300 students, we can't possibly be grading all of these assignments every day, with detail and everything. So what can we do? How can we see that our students are actually learning? We can do quick and easy assessment. So we need to focus here on formative assessment. If you've watched previous webinars on RELO Andes, one of them talked about formative and summative assessment. But in formative assessment, we're looking for understanding in the moment. Are my students following, right? How can we do this? Simple thumbs up, thumbs down game. Ask a question and have students show a thumb up for yes, or I understand, and a thumb down for no, I need help. This also has a metacognitive component in it because students are reflecting on their own learning. If we say, for example, okay, so you feel comfortable talking about your last vacation in the past, students will think about it. And if they need help or they don't feel comfortable with it, they can show you a thumbs down. So then you get an idea of how the class is doing according to their own assessment, and you get metacognition happening because they're reflecting on their own progress, right? So it's a win-win, as we say. Exit tickets. We can give students a small slip of paper at the end of class and ask them to answer one simple question like, what is one new word you learned today? Or what is one question you still have? Or what is something that is difficult for you? What is something you understand well? What did you find interesting today? Etc. So they have to answer you briefly before they can leave the classroom. This is another idea. We can also do peer and self-assessment, where we provide students with a simple checklist to evaluate their own or their partner's work. This empowers them and reduces your workload. For example, does my partner's dialogue have at least 3, whatever we ask for, verbs, past tense verbs, etc. Yeah. So we can work with the students that we have also. But if we do peer assessment, we have to be sure that we are very specific in our instructions. We can't simply tell them, evaluate your peer's work. They're going to say it's fine. So we need to have specific questions and all of those things. Okay. Lastly, and I want to stress the importance of this final point. I saved the best for last. We cannot forget, as teachers, we cannot forget to humanize our students. It is so important to remember that we are dealing with human beings. We are not dealing with a number or just a bunch of things existing in our class. We're dealing with human beings. And when we have such a huge group, it's often easy to forget that we are dealing with human beings. So some tips: learn their names. This is difficult. For me, it's very hard for me to memorize names of my students, but I try to connect one characteristic with their name, different things, right? I figure out ways to remember their names. It means a lot more to your students if you say their name like Maria instead of saying señorita or miss. Yeah, it means a lot more to them. Remember a detail about each student. If your student tells you, for example, I have a new puppy named Lucas, try to remember that. And someday say to your student, hey, how's Lucas doing? That means a lot to your students. And when your students see that they care, that you care about them as people, then they care about interacting in your class. Your class becomes more important to them. Yeah. Highlight the positive. Highlight the positive. As teachers, it's very common for us to focus on the things that are wrong, that our students do wrong. We have to justify why we take points from their grades, right? By saying you did this wrong and this wrong and this wrong. How about what they did right? Yeah, we have to remember what they did right. So a comment once in a while about, hey, I really loved your creativity in class today. Or, hey, your ideas in the debate were really interesting. Awesome, nice job. Those types of comments go a long way for our students. So we have to remember that. And lastly, make your class a safe space. Make your class a safe space. How do we do that? The way that we correct students is important, right? We don't yell at them. We don't scold them for making mistakes or errors in the language. We create a safe space where they feel like it's okay to make mistakes because it's a process, and where they feel comfortable to be able to learn, an environment that's safe and comfortable for them to learn in. Yeah. Okay, thank you, those of you who are still commenting. Kevin, thank you for joining us. A fellow in Paraguay, thank you for being here. He says, have your students create a name tent, a folded piece of paper with their name, and set it on their desk. Yes, absolutely. This helps me to learn their names more quickly. Sure, absolutely. Little name cards. Yeah, they put it on their desk. They can write their names in a fancy way or put a little picture next to their name that describes them, that they connect with, whatever. Yeah, this means a lot to them, and it will create a better environment in your classroom. Okay, Milva says it's so rewarding because they know they're important to us. Absolutely, absolutely. If we're teachers, we have to have our heart in it. Yeah, and that means caring about our students as humans. Okay, that's all that we have time for today. Unfortunately, we could go on for several sessions about this topic, but this is all the time we have for today. I would like to finish with a quote by Michael Marpugo, who is a children's author. And he says, it's the teacher that makes the difference, not the classroom. So for us in large classrooms with low resources, what I want to show you with this quote is that it's you who makes the difference, not your classroom, not the posters that you have or don't have, not the fancy bulletin boards that you have or don't have, not the technology. It's you. It's the teacher that makes the classroom. I'm sure you guys can remember back to grade school, high school, university, when you had teachers and professors that really made a subject for you, or they broke the subject. Either way, right? It's the teacher. So regardless of our resources and our contexts, we have a very important role in our students' English learning. And if we can take advantage of that in the best way, we can have better results. Thank you to all of you who have joined us today. Awesome comments, fabulous discussion. I'm going to go back and read these comments again because I thought a lot of them were very inspiring. Thank you so much, teachers, for interacting, for being at today's webinar. Please come join us on the Zoom session in about 12 minutes. We can continue talking about this topic, and I look forward to seeing you guys again next month. Bye, teachers. Take care.